it's still about brilliant music.
Hello, goodbye. Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast, presented by Hippo Direct. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, podcasting dude at Hippo Direct, and you can reach me at max@hippodirect.com to help use your podcast as a marketing tool. This is episode number 103, and today's guest is Isabel Garvey. She is the managing director of the world's most famous and iconic and oldest recording studio, Abbey Road Studios. The list of famous musical artists to record at Abbey Road Studios includes, of course, the Beatles, and in addition to that, Pink Floyd, Aretha Franklin, Lady Gaga, and even Skrillex. Isabel has the incredible challenge and responsibility of celebrating the legacy of Abbey Road Studios while also leading the charge into the next chapter. And she's doing this through technology and through welcoming emerging artists. Oh, and she knows a bit about that famous zebra crossing as well. It's Isabel. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Isabel Garvey, the managing director for Abbey Road Studios, the most famous, iconic, oldest, we could just keep going on and on and on, recording studios in the world. Isabel, thanks for joining. How are you doing today?
Good. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure as well. I appreciate your time. And the question I've been dying to ask you off the bat is, how many times have you walked across the famous crosswalk?
I do it every day, every single day. So I've been at Abbey Road for 5 years and I've walked across that crossing every day. And it doesn't get old. It doesn't get old. Even walking through the big oak doors, it's such a cultural icon. I never forget it.
Oh my God, I can imagine. I think if I was in your shoes, it would be probably every hour at the top of the hour. I'd make an excuse to get outside and do a little lap, maybe go for a jog, cross by it a couple times. So I'm glad you're taking advantage of that. So we're going to get into the amazing things and quite the monumental challenge you have of managing both the history and the modern side of Abbey Road Studios. But before we get to that, I'd love to learn more about your background. And I know there's some finance in your background that you don't love to talk about since you made such a big pivot. So we can start with music, but before Abbey Road Studios. So what is it about music when you look back that appealed to you in the first place?
Well, I think that's where I do have to confess to my finance background, much as I try to bury it deep. I love music. Obviously, I've grown up with music. I have, the soundtrack to my life like everybody else. But I never had really contemplated a career in the music industry. And a few years into my career, I got a phone call from a headhunter asking, could I go in as a wild card for a job at EMI Music? I thought, wow, that is a random call and what an opportunity. So I went for the interview and got the job. And so that was my kind of big leap into music. It was kind of, as I said, serendipitous rather than proactive. But when I kind of look back, and it's always very easy to retrofit your career when you look back on it with the benefit of hindsight. But I joined the music industry at the height of the Napster challenges. iTunes had just launched, and EMI at the time, and I think most of the other majors, their revenue was about 2% digital. And just for context, it's well over 60% globally now. So, yeah. That's happened in a kind of 15 year period, which might sound like a long time, but actually, the operating and seismic shift that had to happen from a consumer and an organizational perspective is huge in that time. But my remit then at EMI was to start to think about what the organization needed to look like when digital was 20%. And so I kind of quickly slotted into the digital side of the music industry, and kind of I benefited from the fact that, the industry hadn't traditionally been very digital, therefore had no preconception of what a digital executive looked like. And so you could kind of forge your own path. But it was a really, I mean, my colleagues who are a little older than me always laugh at me saying, you know, I joined the music industry at exactly the wrong time, just as it started.
You had incredible timing.
So kind of, but I've stuck it out. We're back growing again. So it's all good. But it was an absolutely fascinating time to be in the industry and to be involved in the part of the business that was growing and providing all of these challenges was, I guess it probably played to my strengths as an executive. But I worked at EMI for, I think, 3-4 years, and ended up on the digital business development team there, striking all the deals with the big tech companies that were kind of getting into digital music. And even back then it was the telcos, because we were still in ringtone land, which makes me feel like a dinosaur.
Yeah, the ringtone. Oh my God, that was such a giant market before so many people started switching to just vibrate.
Exactly.
That takes me back.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Anyway, probably best forgotten. So then I moved from EMI to Warner Music, where I kind of expanded my remit to manage the digital business day to day. And you looked after e-commerce and some of our kind of broader rights kind of businesses, where we own management companies and merchandising companies and live companies, and work to kind of integrate those into the music business model, but kind of always on the growth side of the music industry as kind of digital ramped up. And again, hugely exciting. And then I actually, because I was on the very digital side of the business, I had a lot of interaction with startups, and I have always loved the energy of entrepreneurs and the kind of the ambition of the startup, and kind of my head got turned by it. So I decided to leave the big music industry and I set up my own consulting firm to help smaller media companies accelerate, I guess, their journey as startups, and get any kind of licensing that they needed, or just advice that they needed to really get their business growing quickly. And I did that for 2 years and really enjoyed it and had a lot of clients, but I am terrible at working on my own, is what I discovered.
And you're comfortable admitting that too.
Yeah, no, I'm super comfortable admitting that. I mean, I did a lot of work. I think I am a real doer. So giving people advice, I got an energy out of it, but then if it wasn't followed, I would be somewhat disappointed. And, you know, I think I'm at my creative best then as well, bouncing ideas off people. So I thought, you know what, I think I need to get back into a bigger organization again. And again, very kind of serendipitously, I got a call from Universal Music saying, look, they had just acquired EMI Music, and with it Abbey Road Studios. And they said, look, here's an amazing brand that has global brand recognition, and we want to do some really entrepreneurial things with it. Do you want to come on the journey? And so I was lured in by that, and it has been an amazing 5 years.
I can't believe you said yes to being the managing director at Abbey Road Studios. What were you thinking?
I know. What was I thinking?
Well, I think we'll obviously get to that in a little bit, but
yeah,
what strikes me about your earlier career in the music space is what a crazy time you did get into the music industry. And I think when I just think back to my childhood, and you know, if you look basically across every decade, there's different ways of listening to music. And I grew up on CDs, and I still remember the cassettes my dad had on it, and how he talked about 8-track tapes, and now vinyl's coming back, and there's all that. But I remember when you could first download music digitally, and then now there's a whole world about it. And now not a day goes by, maybe not a minute goes by, where I'm listening to my favorite artists and discovering new artists on Spotify. How has this digital streaming world shaken out compared to what you were hearing and what you were thinking back when they said, oh, you know, at some point this is going to be up to 20% of the industry, which obviously it's well surpassed that.
Yeah, I think, you know, it kind of has played out as everyone had expected. I think, you know, the people running the music industry at the time knew that this was, you know, the transition to digital was inevitable across all media, you know, that music wasn't going to be out on its own, but we certainly led the charge by virtue of the kind of the Napster situation. I think what was hardest to call in all of this is, as the digital market matured and as streaming came out, you know, Spotify came out of Sweden and started gaining momentum in Europe first, was actually trying to define that tipping point of when would people, slow their downloads of digital singles and albums and transition to this access world where you're paying a subscription fee a month to just have the world's music in your pocket. We knew it was coming, but when would consumers kind of move to that type of behavior, and playing that out to ensure that the business didn't have a big bump or a big drop, and then hoping that streaming came in to fill the void. So I think that was the intellectual challenge in all of it. But what I always say is, there's been a huge consumer shift, obviously, from, like you say, I'm older than you, so I was recording my tapes from the top 10 radio show in Ireland doing stop start, like that was my music collection for a while. Right the way through is, consumers had to make a big shift on how we think about music, and now it's kind of a utility. But having said that, we all still have artists that we connect with and gravitate towards. So that concept of fan and, an artist really capturing who you are or a moment in your life is still hugely valid. It hasn't kind of changed that level of connection and behavior. And then from a music label perspective, it's still about brilliant music, right? And so that has never changed. And I think that's, for an industry that was totally disrupted by technology, yes, it's disrupted in terms of how we consume it, but actually the artist is still massively celebrated, and it is kind of core to all of this, and the creativity never stopped.
That's beautiful. It's so key, because I think it applies to the music industry. It applies to all sorts of industries, podcasting as well, YouTube videos, that the quality is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Regardless of what marketing tactics you're using.
Yeah.
It is really interesting to see how that's shaken out. So let's get to Abbey Road Studios, which, again, you shockingly said yes to the offer. Put us in your shoes. It's your first day. You step into Abbey Road Studios, probably take a breath, look around and realize, oh my God, I'm in charge here.
Yeah.
What's going through your mind in that moment?
I remember it's kind of ingrained in my memory, that first day. It was kind of overwhelming. You think, oh my goodness, this is a goosebump inducing place. And it really is. Every day you go through those doors, and now it's destiny. It's, somewhat in my hands. So I guess I felt the burden of responsibility, and then meeting the team at Abbey Road. I have an amazing team up at Abbey Road, and a lot of them have been at the studios for quite a long time. And what's fabulous is that they are such natural custodians of the brand and understand the studios and what makes it tick so deeply. It was like, gosh, I don't want to disappoint these people. We've got to do, and I think you alluded to it in your introduction, is, I always describe this as, trying to bring the studios, future-proof the studios, but always walking the tightrope between heritage and the future. And it's about respecting the past and yet looking towards the future. And how am I going to navigate this when there's this sacred brand on top of all of it? So I guess the burden of responsibility is how I would summarize day one.
I would say that's putting it lightly. So you have, a lot of companies, when you may join, have history. You're at a company and studios that have truly taken that to the next level and are really iconic. How do you weigh that? How do you even approach that? Because you want to be modern, you want to be tech savvy and on top of all the latest trends and really being a thought leader in the music space. But also, you can't forget about the Beatles. You can't forget about all the history that's there. Mm-hmm. And you're literally a tourist landmark as well. I vividly remember how excited I was to do the crosswalk. I've done it a few times, maybe less than you have, but to do the crosswalk when I studied abroad in London. How do you approach this?
Yeah, I think it's, again, I go back to the tightrope. Our biggest asset is our heritage, right? So how do we kind of celebrate the heritage, but pivot slightly to show that we are future forward? And I think going into the building in year one, I think Abbey Road had quite an unfair brand perception in terms of being very embedded in history and possibly a little stuffy. And actually, when you get in behind those doors, as artists can tell you that, come through every day, we have a really vibrant team. The space is, hugely inspirational. And we have this rich, rich history of innovation and pushing boundaries of music and creativity and technology. And, all of the major artists of the day are coming through the doors, on a daily basis. And yet we kind of had this image. So it was my challenge, kind of, if you look at it from a brand and brand marketing perspective, was how do we take this incredible heritage that is the making of the brand today and reflect out all of this vibrance that's in the building today that is very future facing and showing the best of both worlds, and kind of, as I said, walk that tightrope that celebrates both sides of the equation.
I'm thinking there needs to be like a giant mural of you as a tightrope walker, because that metaphor keeps going back as everything you're saying. So
Yeah.
when you think about kind of the stigma or stuffiness, as you said, that was attached to the brand historically, what have you and the team done in recent years that is very different than what you've done in the past? What have you done to change some of what you provide?
Yeah, I mean, we have done a hell of a lot is the short answer. I think, when I went in, my challenge with my team, by the way, it wasn't my challenge alone, was, how do we ensure we're 90 years, for example, next year, 90 years old. So how do we ensure that we are still the world's most famous recording studio in another 90 years? And what do we need to look like? And obviously technology is going to play a key part in that, but also how do we need to change this perceived perception of our brand? And so we set to work, and on that kind of perceived stuffiness that you allude to, the first thing we did was adjust all of our outward facing marketing, our messaging, our social media, to reflect this vibrance that I've alluded to, that does exist in the building every day, so that everyone can see that it's not everyone goes back to that image of EMI engineers in white coats at Abbey Road. Like, that is not a reflection of what actually happens, in 2020. Yeah. But yes, we're a studio where you can book a studio and you can use a microphone from the 1930s alongside the latest AI beatboxing thing. Like, where can you do that in the world, right? So, it's actually, how do you marry those two together to really, as I said, celebrate both sides? So that was kind of on the brand side, but actually on the marketing side of the brand, when we actually looked at what is Abbey Road Studios and how could we grow the business authentically, we've actually done a huge number of things. So if I think about them in sequence, the first thing we tackled actually was tourists like you when you were at university.
Guilty.
The crossing is, we reckon there are about 300,000 to 400,000 people who come to that crossing every year, and you walk the crossing, you take your photo, and you stand outside our building. So it's a fairly empty experience in that respect. So we built a retail store, and we own the building next door to the studios. And we kind of made that a little more experiential. So it's not just selling you the t-shirt, although you can buy the t-shirt if you want, but actually kind of gives a sneak peek of the history of the studio and what actually goes on. So we've kind of, as I said, created a bit of an experience there. And that's been a phenomenally successful business and really well received by all of the kind of the music tourists that come to the crossing. So that was the first thing we did, which was a bit of a no-brainer, I guess. Then the next thing that we did was we looked at the studios themselves. So I don't know how familiar you are with our space, but we have three what we would call heritage spaces, as in they were the original three studios that were there when the building was built. One of them, Studio One, is our biggest studio. It was actually initially built for orchestral recordings and is now used for actually film scoring, as kind of the new version of those orchestral recordings. Wow. Then Studio 2 is the famous one. That's where the Beatles did, I think it's 190 of their 210 songs in that room.
No, I think you lost all credibility because it's not all 200.
Yeah. Well, another 10 were in another studio at Abbey Road. So yeah, it's okay.
Okay. You got all of it covered.
We got most of it covered, yeah. But that is the kind of the iconic studio because of, well, the Beatles, but also, Pink Floyd recorded in there. There's, Lady Gaga, it's kind of a big space for big artists. And then we have Studio 3, which is actually Pink Floyd and Radiohead and you name them that have been in there. But they're all quite big spaces. And so they're kind of targeted, if not for orchestral recordings, for artists that are at the pinnacle of their career in terms of pricing and also just the vastness of the space. So we decided to build 2 smaller studios that were going to kind of entice artists that are at the more developing stage of their journey, because if you talk to artists about their creative experience, a lot of them say, if you have a really positive creative experience somewhere, you're much more likely to go back. And so we wanted to have kind of inspiring spaces for artists earlier in their career, so that Abbey Road kind of becomes their creative home, as it were, or their creative hub as they become bigger and bigger as artists. So that was an important thing to add to our base business, to make sure we're kind of relevant to a broader audience of artists. And then we kind of looked at how we might expand our brand into different types of businesses. And one of the, it may not sound obvious when I say it, but actually one of the kind of more obvious ones is we've moved into music education. We've set up an education brand and business called the Abbey Road Institute. And the genesis of that is, the joke at Abbey Road is that it takes you longer to become an engineer at Abbey Road than it does to become a doctor. So it's usually about 8 years from when you first come in as a runner, which is kind of a very junior engineer, right the way through to when you're blessed as an engineer at the studios. But underlying all of that is this amazing culture of apprenticeship, where the older engineers are training up younger engineers. We have such, as you can imagine, with the studio space we have such a kind of diverse range of artists and musical genres that come through, that it's a really good learning or playground to learn about all types of music. So our engineers are hugely overqualified by the time they get to their 8 years. But we thought actually that culture of apprenticeship is something that we'd love to export out of the building and offer out to aspiring producers and engineers around the world. So our Abbey Road Institute is a diploma in audio engineering and music production, and it's a year-long, really intense course, very practical and hands-on. And it's niche, or as you would say in America, niche.
I'm so glad you said that, because back in episode 99, we had Chris Ducker on, who lives in Cambridge, and he literally said, if you're trying to niche down for your American friends, but like literally it's I guess there's the joke there, but you, in the examples you've shared so far, the thing that ties everything together is opening doors. So it's literally opening doors to tourists like me and my former past. It makes so much sense. You get such an insane level of foot traffic right outside. If you can just get a small percentage of those people to come inside and learn more about the history, but also what you're doing now at Abbey Road Studios, that's amazing. I mean, you have a gem there. And then it's opening doors on the artist side. And I think that's, when I was researching about Abbey Road, that's one of the coolest things that stuck out to me. Was I just always assumed that you had to be the biggest of the biggest name to even step foot in a recording studio there. And you're totally changing that.
Yeah.
What is the impact that you've seen on artists earlier in their careers who have had the opportunity to come in and record and experience Abbey Road Studios?
I mean, it's exactly as you've just described. I think artists across the board that come into the studios, always have a bit of a moment saying, wow, if these walls could talk in here, think of all of the sessions that have happened before me. So quite often artists say, they feel compelled to do their best work at Abbey Road for that reason. So younger or more developing artists coming into our smaller spaces generally just can't believe that they're here. And then because we have all of this equipment, like we have a treasure trove of equipment, as I said, dating from the 30s, they go wild on picking out all the various,
I like wild,
that they've never had a chance to use before, never had that kind of combination before. And then our engineers are just, they are amazing at what they do. So they make the sessions easy. They get what the artist is trying to create with their music. And so, yeah, it's really, I guess, excited and empowering and creative. Yeah, we've had nothing but positive reviews.
That's amazing. It's so cool to hear about those stories of just people who never thought it would even be a possibility. And I'm sure artists who've gotten that experience will never stop talking about it and never stop playing the recordings from it. So
Yeah,
you,
I
you've
hope
created
so.
something special there.
Yeah.
On the 8 years side, so 8 years stuck out to me because I can relate to this because my brother at the time of this recording finished his 8 year, he finished his undergrad in pre-med, and then he finished med school, and he's starting his residency.
Yeah.
And he can speak to how much he's changed and learned and evolved over those 8 years, but also the crazy amount of time commitment, how long that is, how deep of a study and throwing yourself into that world is to prepare yourself for such a serious role like being a doctor is.
Hmm.
And it speaks volumes, pun intended, literally, about how serious you and the team are about your brand and the work you do at Abbey Road Studios as your engineers go through that same time frame.
Mm,
There's such a level of experience and education there.
absolutely.
And then on the tech side of things, so you kind of alluded to this earlier when you talked about, well, you could record on a microphone that is from the 1930s, or you could record on this new, high tech beatboxing AI technology. What are you doing on the tech side and also on the encouraging and promoting startup side of things? Because you kind of have that in your background as well.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think I have I have a digital element to my heart, I guess. So, um,
Oh,
yeah, I think, as I came into the business and thinking about what does a studio look like in 20 or 30 years time, and how do we make sure we're at the forefront of that? As I said earlier, technology is a key component of that. I mean, if we look at how, for example, in the 60s, the Beatles might have spent 6 months in a studio. Today, an artist can prepare so much before coming into the studio on the computer. And then likewise, once they've left the studio, the mixing can kind of happen offline or in a studio. But it was key for me as I thought about, we cannot just be space for hire in another 20, 30 years time. We have to have some kind of technical brand presence before and after the recording process. And so what does that look like? And we didn't have all the answers, but having come from a very digital and kind of startup facing background in the bigger music industry or the recorded music side, I asked one of my colleagues to go out and just have a look at all of startups once again, see how ripe that environment was. And I think we were fortunate in one respect in that computing had this was back in 2015, and computing had just taken a step change where machine learning and AI in particular were suddenly starting to bleed out into the creative industries. And so we were seeing some really new and really different business models and approaches to music that we thought, actually, this is really ripe for some really interesting businesses and startups and collaborations. And also, again, with my old business development hat on, I know that as a startup in the music industry, the industry can be quite hard to interface with if you don't know how to navigate a major record label or even the indie scene. And it's all about connections and connecting dots between distributors and rights holders and all of those things. So we thought, actually, we can play a role here, because Abbey Road, although we're ultimately owned by Universal Music, we're very much music Switzerland. All artists come to us, all genres of music. So actually, in a tech space, we could be fairly neutral in our approach to tech, and yet really helpful across the board beyond just our parent company. So we set up what we call Abbey Road Red, which is a music tech incubator. And the aim of our incubator is to we only take 4 or 5 businesses a year onto the incubator, and we create a really bespoke program around each of the startups. And the aim is that they achieve their goals in terms of connectivity and gaining momentum and getting their first proof of concept or whatever it may be off the ground with the industry in the time that they're with us. And also what it gives us is a window into where tech is going and what clever applications there are of the various technologies throughout the whole of the music value chain. So even though we're a recording studio, we're not just focused on tech that is to do with production. We've had hardware, we've had e-commerce, right the way through to AI, music generative engines. So it's been brilliant, and the startups out there are hugely exciting, and it helps us to try and map how we as a studio then need to evolve in terms of what I was saying earlier, just what tech do we need around our space to keep being relevant to artists and to have really valuable services to music creators.
That right there is mind-blowing, and it's proof of the fact that you are achieving what you're setting out to do into making Abbey Road more modern, but also obviously still celebrating the legacy as well. So I think the vast majority of people, if you go back a little bit, if you ask the vast majority of people if Abbey Road could have an incubator or tech accelerator tied to it, I think most people would be shocked. It's just something they'd probably never thought of before. It's really cool that you're doing that. And I know you can't play favorites as far as different companies or different types of technologies or anything, but in no particular order, do you mind sharing some examples of the technology? Like what kind of products or inventions are you working with here on the tech side?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a couple of businesses that we've been working with in the last 2 years. So AI and particularly music generative engines are kind of having a moment. And it's interesting how that has evolved. 4 or 5 years ago, that was very scary, and people were worrying that the computer's going to start composing and the robots are taking over, and the kind of
you're never going to be able to turn the music off.
Slight dread as is this the beginning of the end? But actually, now that we all, consumers and artists and the industry understand more about the limitations of the technology, the capabilities of the technology, what's really lovely to see is that AI and composition is now very much seen as almost an accelerator of human creativity. So to give you an example that's kind of more specific is, we have worked with a business called Voclia, which it uses your voice as an instrument. So if you make a trumpet sound into this microphone, it will output a trumpet MIDI signal. So in theory, you can, build your whole song by just going dong, 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 because that's the guitar noise, and it, it creates the guitar. Obviously, I'm very good at making guitar noises.
That was that Eric Clapton?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. He's quaking in his boots. But it can output a whole song. So that's kind of, that's a real example of just a practical in-studio creative accelerator. We also worked with a business called HumTap, which was kind of going for the more fun gamification end of music generation, where you literally download the app and you hum and tap into it and you can create your own song. So it kind of takes away that requirement to be musically trained or to be able to play an instrument. Suddenly kind of everyone can produce and create, and it sounds really professional. It's not a race to the bottom per se. And then right the way through to the latest business, they graduated quite recently from our incubator, a business called LifeScore. The founder is actually a composer, and so it's this lovely blend of human composition that the AI then almost puts into Lego blocks, so that the system can create generative music. So you can put any kind of cue on top of it. Like, think of your electric car as an example. Like, if you're going really fast, the music can go faster. If you turn a corner, the music can turn with it. You can put any kind of pivot on the music, but it just generates itself. And that's just, that's just really interesting. And brands are quite excited about what that could do for them. Will we listen to it instead of, the top hits on Spotify? I don't know, but there's a time and a place for that type of music as well.
Definitely.
So, yeah, they're really interesting AI businesses.
To your point, you're not just thinking next 5 years or next 10 years like so many companies are thinking of. When you first started talking about the image and reputation of the brand, you said, well, what's the next 90 years going to look like?
Yeah.
So who knows what kind of technology is going to be involved by then? I'd love to be a fly on the wall in your brainstorming or creative space, wherever you guys think of these ideas and what companies to embrace and support. I'm sure it's just mind blowing what comes out of there. And so you do so many different things, and you've had such a giant and really inspiring effort to modernize Abbey Road while also celebrating the history. What is the biggest challenge that you've come across in your role as MD there?
I think that the biggest challenge initially was, this is possibly too honest, but I arrived with a lot of ideas, in my folder, and we've more or less executed most of the kind of the expansion strategy and the kind of the repositioning piece. And I think in the first year, that was my hardest year, because this is a business that hadn't changed in 86 years or however old it was when I arrived. So, here's this crazy Irish girl arriving with a PowerPoint under her arm with all these grand plans. What the hell is she up to? So I think it took me, the biggest challenge was gaining people's trust that this was all about expanding and showcasing the brand as authentically as possible. This wasn't, about just, I don't know, building an Abbey Road hotel in Las Vegas. Like, that was not, it wasn't that kind of plan. It was actually, how do we, in a really credible, authentic, passionate, creative way, do something interesting with this brand? And so that took me a long time to get people to trust me and to buy into where we were going. And actually, as I'm sure a lot of the people you've had on your podcast have said, seeing is believing. So the first couple of steps, like even the retail store that we got going and showed that the product in there was, beautifully associated with the brand and not just a tatty souvenir store. People kind of, realized actually this is going to be done in a really tasteful way that is celebrating the brand. So anyway, I think that's probably too honest, but it was that was a tough first year trying to get people to buy into the vision. But then they have all come on the journey with me and have been absolutely amazing. So we've come good at the other side.
Well, there's no such thing as too honest. And think about, I mean, doesn't that just give you chills when you think about what you're experiencing that first year and like your early days there, and then to turn around and see already in, a matter of years, what you and the team have accomplished. It's really, it's amazing what you've done.
I'm so proud of the team. I mean, it is, it just, like I say, a brand that hasn't changed, to have implemented that much change and so well executed in such a short space of time. I think we can all be immensely proud.
Hey, Max here. Another thing that you may be immensely proud about is your podcast. And you might have a podcast, you might have one for your brand, or you might not have one yet, but you might be thinking about having one in the future. And there's so many positives about having a podcast. It opens so many doors. But the flip side of it is it takes hours and hours and hours and hours. Did I say hours? Hours to put together every single day, every single week. So there's so much work that needs to go on behind the scenes in order for you to have a successful podcast. If you would like some help with that, I am here for you. Email me at max@hippodirect.com, and I will take care of the behind the scenes and help you with the planning and strategy of your podcast. And you can focus on interviewing your guests and getting back to running your business. Email me at max@hippodirect.com to bring your podcast to life. Now, back to Isabel. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's get to a segment on inspiration and creativity. Okay. So we're going to go through one by one the ideas in your folder. No, I'm just kidding. So when you think about it, because you guys have come up with so many creative ideas, I know Fast Company literally named you one of the top 100 creative people in the world. So like there's like proof that you're creative, according to Fast Company.
And that's gospel. Yeah.
Exactly. So what do you do to stay creative and to come up with these new ways of thinking for such a historic, famous brand?
Yeah, I think I probably answered this earlier, actually, Max. So I am at my most creative when I'm surrounded by people. And so kind of being in the building, absorbing what's going on there. And let's not forget what's happening at Abbey Road every day is just incredible. I'm lucky I can stand at the back of control rooms, sneak in. You see musicians that have never, watching a film score being played, an orchestra walks in having never seen the score before, picks up their instruments, and off they go. And the composer who's composed it where it was in his mind a few weeks ago and it's now being played in the studio. I mean, that is just talent and creativity that is beyond my capability, certainly, but also beyond comprehension. So I think I'm humbled every day by the creativity in the building. So Abbey Road itself is a very inspirational space to be in. And then I have this amazing team who are always challenging of what's next. So I think that's how we stay creative. And then with those, tentacles into technology and a kind of a slight future gazing, it kind of gives you a license to think well beyond the day to day, which also I think kind of opens up the creative mind. So I don't know, I don't schedule creativity. I think it kind of happens fortuitously around in my day to day. But also I find, on a very personal level, I like to run when I can. It's it's good for the mind, but that's often when I kind of actually unwittingly can kind of have some of my more creative thoughts, because I zone out for a bit, right? And then suddenly something kind of comes to.
So when you're not zoning out, when you're in the studio,
yeah,
clearly you've done something to encourage and reward in some sort creative ideas and new ways of thinking there. How do you do that? And how do you create this culture of creativity and encouragement in the studio?
Well, I think I'm fortunate because I have a team that, like I say, are fiercely proud of the brand and do want to be part of the future story. So they are naturally quite creative types. But I think it's, as a leader, I think it's about leading from the front to a degree, but also empowering people. So, none of this is about me and my ideas. This is about us coming up with ideas as a collective and giving people real ownership of the areas of the business that they work in, and feel like they're stakeholders in the business's future. I don't know, I can't really pinpoint what exactly I've done. I think I have a great team, and I try and paint the future, and then they're really good at actually then kind of filling in the gaps and providing the steps to get us there. I don't know, whatever I'm doing it unconsciously.
I think you're just running a ton and you keep getting more and more creative ideas. On that note, what is it about running and when your mind is kind of, I guess, relaxing in a sense,
Yeah.
that you think helps you to come up with ideas and kind of maybe rethink things with a different spin?
I think it's just that. I think it's taking the busyness out of your brain. I mean, because Abbey Road now has so many different business units and different business areas, my days at the studios are crazy. I'm generally running from pillar to post most days. So actually having quiet in my brain and kind of getting distracted by, I was going to say nature, but I live in London, let's be clear. But just kind of allowing for that quiet time is kind of when you have those, I mean, eureka moments is overstating it, but just it's easier to find solutions to either problems that you have or actually ideas that your brain has probably been working on in the background just kind of bubble up. I don't know how to describe it. I went on a really interesting training course a couple of years ago about how quiet time is when your brain is most, is when you come up with your best ideas. And that some people that's the shower, some people it's walking. For me it just happens to be running.
Yeah, it could, for me it's running in the shower, and this is why I have a sore
That
knee.
sounds
No, I'm
bloody
just kidding.
dangerous.
Yeah, I'm not condoning that. So let's get to a fan favorite segment called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
Yeah.
Which regrettably was not recorded at Abbey Road, but it maybe at some point in the future. I'm sure next week maybe.
Yeah.
So Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. This is where we talk about a campaign or ad or trend in the marketing space that is really creative and breakthrough. And at the time of this recording, we have seen how so many businesses have adjusted to the pandemic, and obviously no industry has been unaffected by this. So that goes without saying. But you were saying there's some really cool stories about what some traditionally B2B food sellers are doing in the UK that has been really cool. You mind sharing what happened there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a very mom and pop story in one sense, but I guess it was a kind of my daily nightmare. Was I don't know what it was like in New York, but there was a period here in London specifically where actually trying to get groceries was, nigh on impossible, and everyone was in slight panic mode. And I just think what was really clever is, and I think actually in general, the smartest examples of innovation during lockdown are those businesses that just pivoted to new business models really, really quickly. So my kind of highlight, I guess, is the food sellers in the various food markets in London, whether it's Covent Garden or any of the others, had a real problem because they used to provide all of the food for restaurants, which were now closed. And within a week of everything shutting down in London's, which is my frame of reference, these B2B sellers had pivoted completely to direct-to-consumer propositions where you could box of fruit and vegetables for, I don't know, 25, 30 pounds, and it would arrive on your doorstep a few days later. And with the backdrop where it was impossible to get groceries, this was like magic. So I just think, and they're all very small family-owned businesses traditionally, that are sourcing goods direct from farms and then selling them in a big market area in London. So actually for them to collectively pivot like that is nothing short of phenomenal. And they've really clever little local marketing campaigns, and they used referral systems, and it was just, they're the winners in all of this, I think. Otherwise they were sitting on piles of rotten food. So
right,
it's very small example, but real ingenuity, I think.
I love that example because they literally, at times of crisis, it's a good time to look inward and see, okay, what can we do different, or just what can we do to help? And they literally shifted to an entirely new target market and made it consumer first or customer first, however you prefer to say that.
Yeah.
And so it's so neat. I'm sure everybody who hears about it and knows about the brands locally, there's so much positive goodwill that goes with it. And so it's just gonna help their brands for years to come. And so that's an incredible example. And then I have to share that you made my heart melt separately because you said Covent Garden, and when I studied abroad in London, I interned at Dishoom, the restaurant, the Bombay Cafe. Yeah, are you familiar with it?
Yeah.
I was interning in a marketing role there, but I started in their first location there, which is in Covent Garden, and they've expanded. They've gone an incredible path since then. We actually had Sarah Stark, the head of marketing there, my old boss in my internship. She was on this podcast back in episode 24. But Covent Garden is such a cool area, and it kind of just takes me back. You're talking about it, but overall what businesses have done during all this to pivot and do things for the greater good is very inspiring. So let's get to a segment called The Unusual. So here, think about pet peeves, quirks, weird talents, your favorite menu item from Dishoom. No, I'm just kidding. But what is your biggest pet peeve?
Tea slurpers. People
right,
who
you're going to need
tea.
Oh, I was thinking, like, is that an object that you put in your tea? I didn't realize. Oh my God. Wow. That's embarrassing. That's great. Yeah. What bugs you about it?
It is just such a grating sound in my mind. I can't get past it. It's too distracting.
Yeah. I will avoid slurping for the remainder of this interview just with you in mind. How about quirks? Is there something about your personality that maybe your family or someone on your team or a friend calls you out for that is a little bit quirky about your personality?
Oh God, I don't know. I have a quirk, but it's probably most people from Ireland have this quirk where I can't just say goodbye at the end of a phone call. I have to say bye, 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 bye. I can't.
Like over and over again?
There's at least 3 byes before I hang up. It's a real problem.
Oh God. Now I feel like I'm underachieving with my lone bye.
No, you're nailing it. So I'm just dragging it out.
You just really want to make it clear that you hung up.
Yeah.
And then how about weird talents? In addition to saying bye, 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 Barbara Ann, what is something that super talented at, but it has really no impact on your business? So it could be something around the house. It could be something, a skill that you would go on, a talent show for. It could be something.
I mean, I am so talentless in the kind of party trick sense. Like my party trick is I have double
Party
jointed
tricks.
elbows, and that grosses people out.
Really?
So, yeah.
No, that's a good one.
That's all I can do.
Well, sometimes I give examples of like human body tricks, and then some people are weirded out by that. But that's a great one. That's you break that out, every weekend, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a conversation starter.
Yeah, and then a conversation ender after you say
Yeah,
goodbye
exactly.
17,000 times.
When people
Well,
are
that's a
like,
great one.
really, that's all you've got? My goodness.
Oh my God. All right. Well, let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Yep.
All right. Let's get wild. Have you ever met Paul and Ringo?
I've met Paul.
Oh, what was he like in person? This is just me being genuinely curious.
He's a lovely human being. So nice. And Abbey Road is kind of like his second home. So we're just used to seeing him around the whole time.
Oh, that's nice. That's not bad company to have around.
Pretty good.
Maybe give him like a small brand ambassador contract or something.
Yeah.
What is, you said it's around 300,000 people that typically walk across the crosswalk and take the picture every year. What is the strangest thing that you've seen, or maybe the strangest photo op that you've seen on the crosswalk?
God, that's a good question. There's a lot of weird things that happen out there.
It might need to be its own podcast.
I mean,
episode.
there's definitely been the naked crossing, which is always a good one.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, you gotta stop, Max. You gotta stop.
They told me the first time.
Yeah. No, I think what I find most amusing about the crosswalk, which is kind of the zebra crossing, as we would call it, is actually that people do it the wrong way round. And it's really funny to watch. That's what I find most entertaining is, because we can see out to the crossing from the building, is fans having arguments with each other as to which way they're supposed to be walking, who was barefoot, who's on what square. Like there's there are people who have seriously researched and have real rigor about how it should happen, and they're not shy to tell everybody else there.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's a crazy scene.
Yeah.
I'm a little distracted though. I can't get the thought of the naked crosswalkers out of my head. What is something about, not about the crosswalk, but about Abbey Road Studios as a whole? Maybe it's about the particular studios. What is something about Abbey Road that you think most people would find very surprising?
There's probably a couple of things, but one is it was an actual house, which you can tell from the facade of the building at the front. But what surprises most people when they come in is how deep it is. It's like, it feels like a TARDIS. And that's because Abbey Road, when it was acquired developed as a studio, they developed into the back garden and the back garden of the house next to it. So it's absolutely vast when you get inside.
It just keeps going and going and going.
It goes back really far.
And then this is the most important question I've ever asked. How much would you charge for me to record a podcast at Abbey Road?
A fortune.
All right, you got it. All right, when the world opens up again, I will be there. Have you recorded any podcasts before, or is it strictly music?
No, we've done some podcasts. We have one of our new spaces is called the front room, and it's kind of built as a production suite. So it's got a small little booth in it and a desk. And actually, podcasters quite like that if you're doing quite an intimate podcast.
Ooh, I love that.
That sounds all levels of dodgy. I don't mean that kind of intimate podcast, but you want something that,
Well, with the crosswalkers. No,
yeah,
no.
yeah.
That's amazing. That's so cool. I've been wondering sometime in the future when I return to London, which is long overdue, I'll have to stop by and make a visit. So
Let's sort it out, Max, for sure. Yeah.
absolutely. All right, and I'll bring my fortune. Well, Isabel, thank you so much. This was just fascinating, and I really appreciate all your stories and both your personal story and the Abbey Road story. Where's the best place for people to connect with you and to connect and learn more about Abbey Road?
I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. And to learn more about Abbey Road, our website's pretty comprehensive about kind of all the things going on at present and also the history. But yeah, look me up on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And then last thing, final thoughts. It could be a quote, it could be a music lyric, it could be whatever you want. Maybe you just, flex your double jointed elbows or whatever you want, but send us off here.
Oh my God, the pressure. Well, we have it up on our wall in the studio. We are the music makers and we are the dreamers of dreams.
Thank you, Isabel, for sharing your historic yet modern story. This interview itself was a dream. And thank you, Wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also check us out on Good Pods, where you can find all the podcasts your friends, family, and other favorite people are listening to. In addition, dive into our marketing and business growth resources at hippodirect.com/blog and hippodirect.com/newsletter. That newsletter is the Hippo Digest, and it's your place for wild marketing ideas every single week. And of course, if you are not already, or even if you are, come say hey on your favorite social media platforms at the handles Hippo Direct and Max Branstetter. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!